So K2 is the second highest mountain in the world. It's located on the Pakistan-Chinese border up in Kashmir. It's only about 250 meters lower than Everest, so not significantly lower, but it is known as one of the most difficult and dangerous mountains in the world to climb. And the reasons for that is that it's significantly more remote as a mountain, it's much steeper than Everest is, the climbing on the routes is harder, technically harder than on Everest as well. It has much more fickle weather systems, so on Everest the weather windows will last a number of days, and you know they're guaranteed, or pretty much guaranteed, and for a very particular time of year. On K2, you can't put your finger on when they're going to occur, so you just have to be ready to launch into it and hope that the weather will hold for your summit attempt. The route itself is also much more susceptible to avalanche and rockfall, and when you look at the statistics on K2, there have been 350 ascents since 1954, the first ascent by an Italian team, but there have been 83 deaths on the mountain. So whilst Everest has had more deaths, and there are other mountains that have had more deaths on it than K2, when you compare deaths versus summit, it's not far off 1 in 4. So a much more significant history that the mountain holds. So I made my first attempt on K2 in 2009. I was part of an international team. We were climbing it in a relatively pure style, so we had no Sherpas, we were fixing all the ropes ourselves. It was incredibly hard work, but I was incredibly proud of the style in which we attempted the mountain back in 2009. We were also climbing on a slightly obscure route, not the most popular route, a route called the Chesn. And when we were making our summit attempt at about 7,700 meters, I was leading, so I was out in front setting the ropes. I had an incredibly heavy rucksack on. I'd realised that my oxygen system was faulty and wasn't working, so essentially was carrying about 12 kilos of equipment, which was pointless, but stupidly, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, hadn't dropped it, hadn't cached it, which I probably should have done, and just carried on. And I was exhausting myself in quite deep snow on steep slabs, and so I decided to turn back. Fast forward to this summer to 2016, an opportunity came up to join a British team, which was an incredible opportunity, and thankfully my wife gave me the nod, yes, and my work also said absolutely, we'll support you, and was very fortunate to have some fantastic sponsors along the way. It was an incredible expedition, but in the end, when we were making our summit attempt, we were pushing up to Camp 3, and when we reached Camp 3 at 7,300 meters, we found that the camp had been completely demolished by an avalanche. Now, we knew there had been an avalanche, and we suspected that it may have damaged the camp, but we never quite recognised or realised that it would completely bury or sweep away all signs of Camp 3 on the mountain. Now, for several of the teams, this took away and destroyed so much equipment, especially oxygen, that they were forced to call off any further summit attempt. For us, it was more of a fly in the ointment. It meant that we had to stop that attempt, but we all agreed we would go back down to base camp, we would reform, recock, get any kit that we needed to replace what we'd lost, and head back up the mountain for another attempt in a week's time when the weather window came up. Unfortunately, and this is where the story takes a bit of a bizarre turn, because I'm not aware of this happening to many other teams, really, in history. Unfortunately, our Sherpas then turned around and said that they wouldn't accompany us on a further summit attempt, which really threw us for six. So for a day or so, we scrabbled around in base camp trying to form alliances with other teams, trying to get any other Sherpa support from any other teams who'd be willing to come up the mountain with us. And nobody was really willing to do it. There were a couple of other individuals who were willing to go back up, but a couple of the teams had essentially, and I am very careful how I use this phrase, but the Sherpas refused to make another summit attempt, which in the end we decided was putting too much risk on us to make another attempt. Which was a huge shame, because essentially we had to turn back from the mountain without ever really having the chance to properly fail ourselves or succeed. I strongly believe that there should have been summits of K2 this summer. The weather was good. The snow actually, especially after the avalanche, was good on the mountain. We had what we needed. We had the oxygen, the supplies, the equipment. The team and our collaboration with other teams just didn't work well enough to be able to make another attempt. So we came back again with our heads held high about how we as individuals and as a core of our team had worked, but with a bit more of a bitter taste in our mouth. And it was something that whilst I haven't summited on many expeditions I've been on, I haven't quite experienced that nature or that reason for not being able to continue on with the expedition. When it comes to climbing any mountain, of course, the aim is always to get to the summit. There's always a desire to want to do it first time round. I've always been frustrated when I haven't reached the top of mountains, and some of them I have returned to. Before I went back to K2 this year, I said to myself, and I said to my wife, this will be it. If I don't summit, that's it. My dream of K2 is over, is finished. But having said that, and despite almost when I left K2 I remember saying in one of my blogs, goodbye to the mountain, I probably won't see you again. The minute I got back to the UK, I thought, I want to be back out there. I want to go again. I want to, for various reasons, whether or not it's about looking at the statistics or it's just feeling as though I have unfinished business with that mountain. Mallory famously described Everest as his mistress. That he was married and that he had these dual relationships in his life, the one with his family and with his wife, and the one with Everest, the one that kept on pulling him away from his family. And in the end, it was a third attempt to Everest that unfortunately was his final attempt. Now, there's another question about whether or not he ever managed to get to the summit and finally get over the mistress. But he was always very adamant to his wife that when he'd summited Everest, that would be it, that it would be the focus back on her. Now, I don't know whether or not my wife would agree on that same kind of relationship between her and K2, but there is still that unfinished business, that desire to want to return, and that desire to want to stand up on top of K2 and fly our flag and to be proud about that.